Hello everyone. In this video we are going to be learning about the historical sources of law. So when we talk about the historical sources of law, what we are looking at is where the laws that we have today come from. All right, so, and we are going to be focusing specifically on their original sources. As we learned in our last lesson, law is just a set of rules and regulations that are followed by a society. And so where do those come from? Who came up with those at the very beginning? We understand that for justice to be served, those laws need to be changing and updating with society. And we will look at that in a second video. But today we're going to be focusing on the three main influences on the original sources of law, where we got those original things of what was legal and what was not legal, those original rules and regulations. So the first of the three is from religion. And generally, if you look at almost all of the modern legal systems in the world today, you are going to see a heavy influence of a religion. So we could call this religion and spirituality, but generally they are heavily influenced by a religion, and sometimes more than one. All right. As we already learned, okay, law is a mechanism for justice, and justice is our moral beliefs of what is right or wrong being held up by the law. So where a society gets their moral beliefs from is often from some sort of religion, and especially historically, it has come from a religion of sorts. Okay, so those religions innately in them have this set of expectations and behaviors, okay? And if the majority of a original population in a society is believing in that religion, is attending those religious organizations, then they're also going to believe in those right or wrongs. And so it kind of makes sense that in their original legal systems, as they were developed hundreds of thousands of years ago, that they would be very in line with what the religions of the time were saying. Additionally, in a lot of original societies, we actually saw the religious leaders often playing that role that we now see of judges and juries, which is upholding the law. Okay, they were kind of those first ones, those religious leaders, whether they were named in a religion or they were a monarch like a king or a queen that is based in a religious belief. They were kind of the first ones to say, yeah, you didn't follow the rules or you did follow the rules. And as some people might know from like a Catholic religion, we still see that today with that concept of confessional, that it has to be the religious leader that deals with the fact that you have broken some of those religious rules. All right, the next place that laws originally came from are things called customs and conventions. And this is why I do feel comfortable leaving that first one as religions. I understand that not all areas of the world have something that we would formally call a religion. But their spirituality and their beliefs are going to be covered under customs and conventions if that is the case. All right. Customs specifically are long established ways of doing something. Okay. Think of these maybe within your own family as like family traditions that you have, and you maybe can't explain to people why you do it. Okay. It has been something that has been done for so many years, likely for generations before you. And it's just, we do it because it's always been done this way. This is just the way that we do it. Okay. The key with a custom is that it's something that has evolved very naturally because we have done it for so long. Okay. And that generally results in people not really questioning it because it exists. So in my example of a family tradition, that's specific to your family. So when we're looking at customs that are going to go into the law, we're looking at things that are consistent across a whole society. Okay. We've already been doing it this way. So when they sat down to formalize a law, it just made sense that we would continue doing things that way. Okay. Another similar but different word here is conventions. Okay. Conventions, again, are long established ways of doing something, but they're very specifically to norms and procedures that facilitate interactions between people. Okay, so customs might just be the way things have been done, whereas conventions are dealing with the way people interact with each other. And honestly, a lot of our laws in the legal system do have to do with how people interact with each other. And so that's why this one is a heavy influence on it as well. Okay. Both customs and conventions are generally not something that is written down originally. When it becomes a law, it is. It's generally kind of this unspoken agreement. But the difference between customs and conventions, customs, it's we've all done it forever, so we just do it. Conventions is that multiple people have agreed to allow this to facilitate our interactions with each other. So one of the examples, for example, of conventions that I would share with you is the way that we wait for something. Okay, so growing up in Canada, I was taught that we wait in a line. If there's a whole bunch of people that are waiting to get into a store that isn't open yet, or we're all waiting for food, or we're all waiting for something, we would get into a line. And there is, believe it or not, even if this is normal for you, there is a lot of unspoken agreements that we have about this line. Okay, that you got here first, so you're at the front of the line, and then each person that comes afterwards is going to go to the back of the line. Okay, when I moved and lived in China, okay, I arrived somewhere, there was a bunch of people waiting to get in something, and I stood back as if forming a line, because that's the convention, the agreed upon way of society that we've always done. And then as more people arrived, they all crowded into the front in like this big ball of who can get to the door first. Okay, so that means the other people there were not agreeing to this unspoken agreement. I was the odd one out. I didn't know what the unspoken agreement was, and the main part of that agreement is, I guess, survival of the fittest and getting to the front first. Okay, so these would be conventions that exist. Again, these didn't necessarily become laws, but they are conventions that exist in certain societies versus other societies. And a lot of people that have come from other countries to Canada do find it really interesting the way that we line up for things. And Canadians will get really upset if they don't, and they try to cut into that line because we have this convention. Even though when you think about it, there's no law, there's no formal rule. If you were to complain to a store that somebody jumped the line, nothing can really be done about it. It's just this unspoken agreement that we have about the way that we're going to act and interact with each other. All right, so that is our second influence. So again, when those laws were originally being created in all the different legal systems of the world, we had religion playing a huge influence onto the beliefs of right or wrong and that concept of justice when we're writing laws. And then we have customs and conventions playing a huge influence on the way that it's expected that people act and behave in society. And finally, we have immigration, colonization, conquering, depending on the area that you are in, and how that would influence it. So colonization is, often the most dramatic in this sense, similar to conquering earlier on. But in essence, when we see colonization, we see people from one culture that likely has their own original legal system that is already in place, that comes from their religious beliefs, that comes from their customs and conventions. And then they are going to be going into another territory which already has all of those things in their own way, and they're going to force this on them. Okay, so for example, my husband is from Cameroon. They were colonized. The area that he's from was by the English. The other side was by the French. Okay, and when they came in, they were taught English. They were taught the religion. They became Catholic. And the government now is still run on the legal system from France. The majority of the country was colonized by France. And so their legal system, all of their laws stem from the French legal system, which stems from the religions and the customs and conventions in France, not necessarily in Cameroon. All right. So when we see these people that are coming in, it's fairly obvious in colonization or conquering, where we are going to fully put a new system on top. That's going to have a really big influence on that original legal system. And again, we have to be very careful when we say original. Okay. We mean the origins of the current legal system, not the one that was on the land from the very, very beginning. All right. And to emphasize that, I'm going to click or I'm going to link this video below so you can watch the whole thing. It really is phenomenally done. So I want to give credit to the people that did this. But what this video does is it shows you over time, okay, what the world map has looked at. So we start way, way, way back, okay? And again, if you're not aware, BCE, we're counting down to 0, and then we'll start counting back up again to 2025, okay? And so we are starting to see, and if you look right now, you probably don't know most of these names, okay? These were what the civilizations at that time were known as, okay? If we jump forward a little bit, we're seeing some more added on. Jump forward some more. Oh, all those names have changed. Okay, all of those names have changed. So those areas and those peoples and those customs and those conventions have changed as these things have continued to happen throughout history. Okay, here we're seeing the Roman Empire coming through, which is taking over England, the Roman Empire there, and Europe and all of that. So again, all of those original customs and conventions, even within Europe, have been taken over and have been changed. We're also seeing a lot of that movement in the Asian continent over here. Okay, if we jump ahead again, okay, all of a sudden that looks very, very different. Okay, and again, all of these names, some of them are familiar, like France or Wales. Okay, some of the things that we know today, Sweden, are starting to be established, but lots of them are not. Okay, and so what's really important to remember is that the borders that we see on a map today are very young in the history of the world. Okay, they are very recent. Okay, now we're starting to see North America, and again, it's the UK and it was Spain. It was who colonized these areas. There were people there before that with their own customs and conventions and possibly religions. But all of that has changed. It has changed many, many times. And so when we're looking at these legal systems, this is why we are noting that it is the legal systems that are in place today where the origins of those ones came from, not necessarily the origins of the legal systems that have been on that land, because that has changed hands and changed peoples, and changed many things many, many times throughout history. All right, so as an example of this, we're going to go through and look at Canada specifically. That's where we're located. And we're going to look at our current legal system and see if we can pull out those origins that we have been talking about. In essence, most of the laws that we have today, you can track them back to these origins that we have just talked about, assuming that they have not been altered since this current legal system was put into place. And Canada's legal system is fairly young. Canada was established in 1867, which is only 158 years ago, and it actually only became its own fully controlled legal system about 40 years ago in 1982. All right, so that legal system is quite new. We have had some significant changes in the last 40 years or so, but any of the laws that are the same as they were when it was first put into place, we would be able to track back to one of these three origins. So getting started, okay, I know it was number 3, but I'm going to start with colonization because that is really, really significant on the lands that are known today as Canada. Okay, the indigenous people that lived here, there was hundreds of different groups of them that had their own languages, their own traditions, their own customs and conventions, their own beliefs. Okay, there were similarities between them, but there was lots and lots of different ones, and a lot of them were not permanent on the lands. They were moving throughout the lands. However, if we look at Canada's legal system, its origins of the legal system that we have today, none of those indigenous religions, spiritualities, customs, and conventions are included in it. And that reason is because of colonization. Okay? The legal system that we have today in Canada came from the French and the English colonizers. Okay, and so all of those origins come from those countries. We see the customs and conventions of the English, the British, the UK, and in parts of Canada of France, not of the Indigenous cultures. And while there are lots of people who are working to change the laws to better match and bring back some of the Indigenous ways, when we look at the origins, they're not there because of colonization. All right. In England, Britain, at the time when they came and colonized, they used a legal system called common law. And in France, they called it civil law. It's two completely different legal systems. Okay. They even have different trial systems. The trials look different. One is using the inquisitorial system and one is using the adversarial system. Okay. And both are still present today in Canada. Canada is unique in the fact that we have both. Okay, just for a little bit of your own understanding, in the inquisitorial system, this is the system that came from France, and South Africa still uses it today as well, another of their colonies. Okay, in a trial system, the judge is very much the leader. They do a lot of talking and everybody talks to them. Okay, also in their trial system, the accused must take the stand and answer questions about their case. They do not have a choice. Okay, you may be presumed innocent, but that's not a guarantee. Okay, there are certain offenses that you might be assumed guilty and you have to prove your own innocence. And those are all on the left side because they are different than in the adversarial system. Okay, also the accused has very limited rights in this system while they are going through the trial process. Okay, on the adversarial side, the things that are different is that the judge's role is really, really limited. It's rare that you're going to see the judge speaking a whole lot. The lawyers really run the show, and the judge is just observing to make a final decision at the end. Also in the adversarial system that comes from the British system, the accused does not have to take the stand. Many trials, they do not. They can choose to, but they do not have to. And always, always, always the accused is presumed innocent. It is entirely the work of the government's lawyers, called the Crown lawyers, to prove that this person is guilty of the crime. Okay, this means that a lot of crimes go unpunished, but it is put in this way to try to ensure that somebody that is innocent is not wrongly convicted. Okay, and the accused has many rights, even more so often than everyday people, and they are written right in the highest level of our Constitution. Okay, both systems set out to seek the truth, and in both systems, the judges can ask questions. Okay, they are both adequate systems. They were developed by different countries, different peoples, different customs and conventions. But again, those are the customs and conventions of those European countries of France and England and the histories of their lands and everything that transpired before these legal systems were put into place. What's really unique about Canada is that we have both legal systems still in our country. So in Quebec, which is predominantly lived in by those ancestors of the French, they still have the inquisitorial system, and in the rest of the country, we have the adversarial system, which means that our Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the country, which cases can get moved to from any province or federally, needs to be able to function in both. Okay, and so we are actually the only in the world dual court system where the judges have to be able to oversee cases in both of those systems. So that's just something that's a little bit unique about Canada. All right, the next influence of our current legal system when it was first made is definitely religion, and that is the Christian religion. Okay, again, the Indigenous people of the land, that's not their religion or spiritual beliefs, but that was the religion that was brought over by the colonizers, and that was present predominantly at the time by the people that were making the laws, and so that is what we see. Okay, in our Constitution, in our highest legal document, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it starts with the words, with belief of the supremacy of God. It's written right into a lot of our documents. In Christian religion, they have the Ten Commandments, which are kind of set, I will say set in stone, in history said put onto stone, of things, how you act and how you shouldn't. 3 of those are still formal laws that we have today that we can source right back to that religious document that's there. Okay. We do know that a number of the laws in Canada have changed over time. That is seeking justice, that is trying to match society. However, again, when we're looking at origins, it used to be law that the Lord's Prayer was said at school every morning. Okay, that comes from that Christian religious origin. That's no longer the case. However, okay, if you think about when schools have holidays, they are still all surrounding the Christian religions of Christmas and Easter. Okay. Again, it used to be illegal for stores to be open on Sunday. And I found it very interesting when I moved to England, that was still the case. And that was really odd for me. I'd always grocery shopped on Sunday and nothing was open the whole day. And so that was a part of our original laws. Okay, that's not true anymore. However, you'll notice that the store hours on Sundays are almost always shorter than any other day of the week, which still comes from that original origin of Christianity and God's word to have a rest day on a Sunday. All right, and then finally, we are looking at customs and conventions. Okay, so customs are those long established ways of doing things, okay, that come into law. So one of the interesting laws that we have in Canada is under the Real Estate Property Act, and it is the concept of adverse possession, okay, which says that land, okay, even if you own it, you have all the documents for it, okay, which is a concept that is in our laws because of colonization, because in our Indigenous ancestors' mines, land cannot be owned, but in the British and the French mines that came, their legal systems, land can be owned. So land is owned. However, if you have made no attempt to use or be on or recover land for 10 years, then whoever has been on and or using that land gets possession of that land without buying it from you. Okay. It's a bit of an odd law that's not prevalent in a lot of other places, but it was very common practice early on in Canada. So as settlers would come, they would find land that wasn't being used and they would start farming on it. They would start utilizing it. The government was really excited about them doing it at that time because they wanted to develop the country. They wanted the colonizers to develop the country. And so they would then gift them the land after they had been doing it for 10 years. And so that was a custom that existed and was written right into the laws when we had it. So yes, what that means is that for example, you might have seen some tent cities around town as people are struggling with the affordability of having a home. And so in essence, those people are living on property that doesn't belong to them. If they were able to stay there for 10 years and the owner made zero attempt, doesn't have to be a successful attempt, zero attempt to move them off of that property, they would gain that property. Okay, so a lot of these really unique laws are actually the reasoning behind some of the headlines that you might be seeing. So I know about a year ago, there was a headline saying that the city of Kitchener was issuing eviction notices for everybody that was living in one of the big tent cities. So they gave them the paperwork to say, you're evicted, you have to leave, but then they never did anything about it. They never forced them to leave. And a lot of people were really, really critical of them. But legal experts would understand that even if they don't mind them being there, they have to at least make the document and send it to them so that it resets the timer and so that they're not going to gain that possession after 10 years. And there's an article linked here, and I'll link it below as well, about some situations specifically in Alberta with the farmers about that as well. Okay, another example has to do with conventions. Again, remembering that conventions have to do with our interactions with other people and our procedures that are in place. So when Canada was first a country, okay, we were almost like a baby or a toddler, and the UK wanted to still hold our hand. And so any laws that we passed had to be signed off on by, at the time, the Queen or the UK to say that, yes, that's acceptable, kind of like getting a parent's permission. And so the Queen was pretty busy, and so they set into place this concept of a Governor General. This was a person that was in Canada, that was aware of what was happening in society, and that would act on the Queen's behalf. Okay, 43 years ago in 1982, when we got control of all of our laws, okay, we are now technically completely separate from the UK and France. They have no influence on us. However, still to this day, we have a Governor General, and the Governor General's signature is on every law before it becomes a law in Canada. Okay, do they actually have any power? No. Could they ever not sign it and say this isn't going to be a law? No, not anymore. But this was a procedure and an interaction that we have always done. And so we all just kind of agree to continue to do it for the sake of that convention and the way that it's still written. It's still written in the law that this is something that needs to happen. Okay, this is not our current federal Governor General. This is Mary Simon from 2021. She was the 30th Governor General, and she was actually the first one to be of Indigenous heritage, which was a really big deal at the time. So that's why I have her on the slides there. All right, so that comes to the end of our lesson. Simply to recap, okay, today we have looked at those three origins of modern legal systems. Again, talking about the legal system that exists today, not necessarily the very beginning origins of the land itself. Okay, and we know that those come from religion, customs and conventions, and or colonization, conquering, or immigration. All right, we then look specifically at Canada using these three and some examples that exist from there that I was modeling that for you. And so what I want to leave you with today is to think about other countries. Okay, we can use this exact same model that we did on Canada's legal system to look at the legal systems that exist in any other modern country in the world today and understand a little bit better why they might have some laws that we might think are a little bit odd or different based off of these three origins for their current legal system. See you in the next one.